Are you still using the control glyph? Then we need to talk. What are the best glyphs to use as a Necromancer? Which ones are worth it in every scenario, dungeon pushing and boss fights? And the most important thing, which board, like Flesh Eater, for example, is perfect for the Scorch glyph because it has 75 intelligence. Whereas the Bone Graft board would, it would really not be good for a willpower glyph at all. Now, why is control so horrible, or actually not as good as you want it to be? The multiplier of 10 and 20% bonus damage is incredible, but it's completely useless in boss fights. And otherwise, inside dungeons, you're deleting everything anyways. So this amount of bonus damage is a complete waste. Sure, more damage against crowd-controlled enemies, but again, you're not crowd-controlling bosses. You can't stun them, you can't slow them, you can't do anything to them. So that multiplier is completely wasted and really ain't needed for actually pushing a dungeon. Compare this to the Amplify glyph, for example. That's enemies affected by curse skills take 10% multiplicative increased damage from you and your minions. So that's a fixed one. Always 10% more damage because you can actually curse bosses. But more important is that it also pushes every single node here. Right now it's level 15, that is 114%, but it goes up to 150%. That will almost triple the value up to 125, and that's to 12.5, 12.12. So much more damage, and even the willpower and the dex is being pushed. It's incredibly useful, especially here in the early one, and this one works for every single necro build. If you're now more into blood though, there's the Blood Drinker glyph, which gives you the Fortify, but here the 150% you can see working out, and it's just such a huge boon, such a huge boost, and you don't have to waste any more points in here because the normal path essentially provides you with 40 intelligence. Also, as a little trick to find out which boards are good for which glyph, Mobalytics has an amazing feature. For example, I take the Amplify glyph here, which needs 40 intelligence, and it's going to be marking every intelligence node. So you can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Well, it's 10, so that's 50, then 60, 70. But up there, I already had 75 for Scorch. So it's not even the best intelligence board. But if you compare this now to Willpower, for example, taking Dominate for Overpower, that would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's nothing. That's horrible, to be honest. Just 7 Willpower note? And the same goes for Dexterity, which is just minimal available. Now, if you're not a fan of Blood Drinker or Amplify, because you're not using curses for some reason, there's also the Sacrificial glyph, which gives you the same 150%, but you deal 10% increased damage while you have no active minions. These are all incredible good options for your first board, no matter which build you're going for. Now there's a fourth one that is also an option, and that would be Gravekeeper. Grants bonus to all rare nodes within, not magic nodes, rare nodes. And this goes up to 120%. You deal 2% increased damage for up to 12% for every close corpse. You gotta have a bunch of corpses close by, and if you're exploding them, especially with Black River, it won't really work and not as efficient as the other from a multiplier value. But getting 120% on your 20% damage, 10 in, 200 armor, 10 in, not a horrible choice as well. But the Amplify multiplier, for example, is just safer, or the Sacrificial one, which just simply always works. Now for many builds, and almost for every single build I'm going for, Sign of Death is kind of the second board, because Sign of Death is the damage reduction, but also the bonus damage if there is all corpses exploded straight away. It's kind of neat. And as you're looking at Sign of Death, one thing pops already in your eye. Let's slot a Willpower glyph. There is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 Willpower nodes. Oh boy. It's not bad for intelligence. There's still 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 with a big 10 intelligence nodes. So it's not horrible for intelligence, but it's just so much better for willpower. And no, dexterity is just like absolutely minimal here. And here for your overpower builds, you kind of want to slot Dominate, but there's also a willpower option for non-overpower builds. That is Imbiber, which gives you more damage while healthy for every willpower. Now, the potion healing feels horrible, right? It's kind of like, oh man, potion healing, that's terrible. But the damage while healthy is its own damage bucket that kind of multiplies with all your damage. And it applies to everything. And compare this to the Desecrated Ground damage that I've been using with my build right now. This is an incredible glyph. The problem here being that there's only one skill that profits from Desecrated Ground really, and that is Blood Wave. Sure, you can make Sever have some Desecrated Ground and Blood Mist, but so it's an extremely conditional rune that only works in one specific build. If you take this out and slot the Imbiber, it suddenly works in every single build. And that is just a flat increase of 103% damage while healthy to everything. Every dot, every skill, every single source of damage you're pulling out gets higher. Now, an interesting observation, I'm playing a darkness build, so I'm obviously having the darkness glyph going, which gives me more shadow damage, right? And whenever you and your minions deal shadow damage to an enemy, the enemy deals 2% reduced damage. Problem here, the shadow damage is nice, the damage reduction is okay, but I would prefer a damage multiplier. This is also not the perfect board to kind of put it in, because it's only 60 int. I mean, I could get 65 int, and that's kind of it. As we count it down here, technically, this would be 70 in, right? This would be 70 intelligence. So if I take every single node, this darkness glyph might be better suited for down there. But then again, the multiplier, magic multiplier glyph, I would get a little bit more shadow resistance, a little bit more dex. I would get a bit more shadow damage and a wee bit more willpower. Compare this to the vast amounts more armor and all damage we've been getting down there. Not really worth it, is it? And again, if we go for the rare note multiplier, that would be also shadow resistance and shadow. Man, wouldn't really work, would it? Surprisingly, the wither board is also very good for willpower. You get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. But as intelligence also, it's just not really perfect for it. Interestingly enough, there is an easy pass for dex because you sometimes have to look at how easy could you also get to the nodes. Because if I'm coming from the right side here, 1 dex, 2, 3 dex, go further, clap this, 4 dex, go here, 5 dex. So if I just wanted to activate a dex glyph here, extremely simple, like if I want to get essence activated, well, that's really simplistic here right now, right? I can just take some on the way without having to go like weird ways and having to go like here you see like get some strength node to just reach the others, and I have to go through the int node that I don't actually need or want to just get to some more willpower, which will be saving us Paragon points. That's something to genuinely think about. Now, Imbiber's one, you definitely want to straight up level to level 21 right now for the Abattoir of Zir. And the same goes for either Blood Drinker, Amplify, Sacrificial, or Gravekeeper, as you want these because they're so variable and interchangeable for whatever build you're playing. Well, Blood Drinker obviously not, so rather go for the other 3 probably. Now, there's one glyph we could try to make a case about, and that's Exhumation, which would be for every 5 intelligence purchase within range, your corpse skills deal damage. And it would fortify you and give you a little bit of damage reduction. My problem being here, this is literally only your corpse skills, and also 11.7%. So it's not really scaling that high per. If you compare this, for example, right now with your Essence Glyph, I know corpse skills can't crit, but just look at it. The Essence Glyph gives you plus 20% increased critical strike damage for every 5 dex. And this gives us plus 11.7, I think like 14, 13 on the max. That means that the Essence per more dex is just so much better. Or the Dominate in general for the willpower is just absolutely incredible. Even the Desecrated Ground is plus 60%. But if your choice would be between Exhumation and Imbiber, because you're not sure if you'd rather want to have that little bit more damage reduction, the answer is still Imbiber. Because Imbiber, again, has the chance to give you all damage to everything. So even if you slot on Exhumation 70 intelligence and pump this as high as possible, you're still kind of at the point where it's just your corpse explosion getting stronger. While the Shadow Blight, the Blight, every other piece of damage, the X-Felds, don't really care about this. And you get so much more damage than just that, even if you're trying to kind of push corpse explosion as high as possible. It's a little bit wasted to then just only focus on that when there's so much more damage coming out of you. One really good glyph to think about is Territorial though. For every 5 dex purchased within range, you get increased damage to close targets. And then you get 10% damage reduction against close targets. And the cool part about this is, again, it just works. Compare this to the Control Glyph. Control Glyph doesn't work against bosses. This one, you just stand next to the boss. Even as a Bone Spear, you just walk up to the boss and you do bonus damage to close targets. And we know how Necro plays, especially when you have Bone Storm active and you get some barrier bonus, and you generally have like your 10,000, 13,000, 14,000 armor with disobedience. You just don't die. And then being close to targets is not really complicated, but it's a dex node. So which board is this good for? For decks, I like to recommend the Flesh Eater board. The Flesh Eater board is natively very good for decks, especially since they're so easy to reach. Follow the red level pass here. I'm going to start here. I'm going to go up. We can go over 1 dex, 2 dex, have the glyph activated, another dex, take the damage to elite, dex, damage to elite, dex, and then go out. That's taken 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Very easy. Now, if you want to get to the last 2, you'd have to take 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Intelligence is increasing your all damage, so that's very nice, especially when you're playing Wither, for example. And last but not least, you could go down here, 1, 2, for the bonus resistance to all elements and the bonus intelligence again. So it's just a very easy path to kind of reach everything in the Flesh Eater board. That being said, if you're just looking to activate the glyph and you don't really care about the actual rare nodes and everything, there's also a case to be made for the Bloodbath board, where you just with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 points would already arrive at the glyph, and then you can get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So there's a bunch of dex nodes around 2. And last but not least, you could go into the damage while fortified to take these 2. So not terrible. But usually most necro builds actually use the Flesh Eater node, and that's where you then also would like to slot the 1 dex node you're going for. But there's one I haven't really mentioned today, and that's Exploit. Exploit is actually incredible. Yes, they nerfed how vulnerable multiplies with crit damage and overpower and all the other stuff, but there's going to be one thing said about Exploit. First, on the max level, it's 8% increased damage per 5 dex, okay? And also, you dealing damage to a vulnerable enemy increases your damage by 1% for 6 seconds up to 10%. And here again, the good part works against everything, right? You go through the dungeon, normal mobs doesn't really matter that much. Again, they fall anyways and you're zooming through like an absolute legend. But against bosses, this is a save multiplier that just is there. Because getting the vulnerable is metamorphosis, dash through, corpse tendrils, whatever. Simple as that. Vulnerable is always possible, and vulnerable does always work. The good part, since this is only +8, you might just want to activate it, right? We talked about it. I'm here in the Bone Graft board, and the Bone Graft board is essentially just there to activate my glyph. So if I would now want to play Exploit here, level 1, obviously not having the range because, right, it's dex, dex, dex. But still, if it was leveled, or even if I wanted to go all out, that's 2 more dex nodes that I could easily take to get this activated. Then we'll go with a minimal damage plus from the Exploit, but you would still get the 10% multiplier. And that's more often what we're looking for to get these save multipliers going. 10% doesn't sound like a lot, but if you're already doing 1 million damage, 10% is quite decent. And there is more than just that 10%, right? You have this 10% multiplier, and then you get the amplified 10% multiplier, and then the damage while healthy gets on top. And that's where the damage just starts escalating really hard. There's a final rune I would like to make a case for, and that is Undaunted. This is very conditional and only working on a couple of builds, but for every 5 willpower purchase within range, you deal 2% increased damage while fortified, and you gain up to 10% damage reduction the more fortify you have, which is another 10% damage reduction. That can be nice, and especially more damage reduction, less fortify lost. But also in blood builds, you can so easily get that fortify rolling. Like it's no time. I mean, you saw the Blood Drinker glyph that fortifies you already for 1,500 of your life. Plus blood builds just generally can go up there. It's not a horrible choice. I will have to experiment with this more. In general though, focus on the always work glyphs first, because they are so interchangeable between builds. And do not fall for the trap card of the control glyph, because we all thought it's insane, but the more you look at it and the longer you play, you kind of notice it ain't that good, son. You're getting the dungeon mobs anyways obliterated, but the other stuff will help you very good in the Abattoir of Zir. Which one is your favorite glyph? And if you're now looking for builds for these glyphs, P4wnyhof or Bloodlancer?